The sound of my brother's laughter echoed through the dining room like shattered glass. I stood frozen in the doorway, still wearing my dress blues, the weight of my medals suddenly feeling heavier than they ever had during any combat mission. My father, Captain Thomas Hartwell, sat at the head of our family table, his weathered hands folded neatly over his napkin, his expression unreadable. My mother bustled around the kitchen, pretending not to notice the tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Oh, this is rich, my brother Derek sneered, gesturing at my uniform with his fork. Playing dress-up again, Sophia? What is it this time? Some community theater production about war heroes? His words dripped with the same condescension I'd grown accustomed to over the years, but tonight they cut deeper than usual. Tonight was supposed to be different. The Hartwell family dinner table had always been a battlefield, but the war lines were drawn long before I ever put on a uniform. Growing up in the shadow of Fort Braxton, military service wasn't just expected in our family, it was practically encoded in our DNA. My father had served 22 years in the Army, retiring as a captain after a distinguished career that included 2 tours overseas and commendations that lined the walls of his study like trophies from another life. Derek, my older brother by 3 years, had been groomed from birth to be the family's next military legacy. He was the golden child, the one whose childhood bedroom was decorated with model fighter jets and whose high school years were spent in ROTC leadership positions. Every conversation at family gatherings revolved around Derek's future military career, his acceptance to West Point, his guaranteed path to becoming an officer just like dear old Dad. I was the afterthought, the daughter who tagged along to military ceremonies and air shows, watching from the sidelines while Derek and my father discussed strategy and tactics like they were already comrades in arms. My interests in military history and my natural aptitude for leadership were dismissed as a little girl's phase, something I would grow out of once I discovered boys and makeup and all the other things daughters were supposed to care about. When Derek graduated from West Point and was commissioned as a second lieutenant, the celebration lasted 3 days. The entire extended family descended upon our house in Millbrook, a small town just outside the base, and every conversation centered around his bright future, his potential for rapid promotion, his destiny as the next generation of Hartwell military excellence. I was 17 then, a senior in high school, and I remember standing in the corner of our living room, watching everyone fawn over my brother in his crisp new uniform, feeling invisible despite being surrounded by dozens of relatives. That night, after the last guest had gone home and Derek had finally stopped preening in front of every reflective surface in the house, I found my father in his study, polishing his old service medals. The room was his sanctuary, lined with military memorabilia and photographs from his service years. I knocked softly on the doorframe, and he looked up from his desk with tired eyes. "Dad," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I've been thinking about my future, about what I want to do after graduation." He set down his cloth and gave me his full attention, something that happened so rarely I almost lost my nerve. "I want to join the military. I want to serve my country just like you and Derek." The silence that followed felt eternal. My father's expression shifted through several emotions: surprise, confusion, and finally something that looked almost like pity. He leaned back in his leather chair, the one that creaked whenever he was thinking hard about something, and folded his hands across his stomach. "Sweetheart," he said finally, using the tone he reserved for explaining why I couldn't have a pony or stay up past my bedtime, "military service is different for women. It's complicated. There are limitations, restrictions. It's not the same path that Derek is on, and it never will be." He gestured toward a photograph on his desk, one of him and his unit in desert camouflage. All men, all young and serious and ready to change the world. "But I'm smart, Dad. My grades are better than Derek's ever were. I score higher on every aptitude test. I know military history better than most people twice my age." The words tumbled out in a desperate rush, each one an attempt to prove something I wasn't sure I could prove to a man who had already made up his mind. Intelligence isn't the issue, Sophia. It's about physical requirements, about fitting into a system that's built for men. You're my daughter, and I want what's best for you. College, maybe nursing school or teaching, something stable, something safe. His voice was gentle but firm, the same tone he used when explaining military tactics to civilians who wouldn't understand the complexities of real warfare. I felt something break inside me that night, something fragile and hopeful that I didn't even know I'd been carrying. But instead of crying or arguing or throwing the tantrum he probably expected, I simply nodded and said goodnight. I walked to my room, closed the door, and began planning a different kind of campaign. The next 18 months were a careful dance of deception and determination.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I applied to state universities like my parents expected, but I also walked into the Army recruitment office in downtown Millbrook on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in October. The recruiter, a staff sergeant named Martinez, with kind eyes and calloused hands, listened to my story without interruption, nodding occasionally as I explained my family situation, my academic record, and my burning desire to serve. "Your scores are exceptional," she said after reviewing my practice ASVAB results. "With numbers like these, you could go into intelligence, military police, even cybersecurity. The Army needs smart soldiers, especially smart women who can think strategically." She leaned forward across her desk, lowering her voice like she was sharing military secrets. "But if your family doesn't support this decision, it's going to be harder. Military service requires sacrifice, not just from you, but from everyone who loves you." I thought about my father's study, about the way Derek's uniform had transformed him in everyone's eyes, from my annoying older brother into a hero worthy of respect and admiration. I thought about the family dinners where military strategy was discussed around me but never with me, as if my presence was tolerated but my opinions were irrelevant. I thought about the crushing weight of being perpetually overlooked in a family where service and honor were the highest virtues, but only when demonstrated by the men. "I understand the sacrifice," I told Sergeant Martinez. "I've been making it my whole life." The paperwork was signed in private, the oath taken in a ceremony my family knew nothing about. By the time my high school graduation rolled around, I had already committed to 8 years of active duty, with my first assignment beginning the day after I turned 18. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would tell my parents I was taking a gap year to work and save money for college, something responsible and mature that they couldn't argue with. By the time they discovered the truth, I would already be deep into basic training, legally an adult, beyond their ability to stop me. Derek left for his first duty station that summer, a cushy assignment at Fort Richardson that came with all the perks of being an officer. The family gathered again for another round of celebrations, this time focused on his departure and the bright future that awaited him in Alaska. I smiled and took pictures and played the role of the proud little sister, all while counting down the days until my own secret departure. The night before I left for basic training, I sat in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by packed boxes and empty walls, writing a letter I would never send. It was addressed to my father, explaining everything I couldn't say out loud, apologizing for the deception while refusing to apologize for the decision itself. I wrote about feeling invisible, about being dismissed, about watching my brother receive everything I had ever wanted simply because he was born male. I wrote about dreams and determination and the desperate need to prove that worth wasn't determined by gender or family expectations. When I finished, I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my jewelry box, underneath the cheap pearl necklace my grandmother had given me for my 16th birthday. Then I laid down on my narrow twin bed for the last time, staring at the ceiling where glow-in-the-dark stars still spelled out constellations I'd memorized years ago, and prepared to become someone my family had never imagined I could be. The bus to Fort Benning left at 5:30 in the morning. I slipped out of the house while everyone was still asleep, carrying a single duffel bag and wearing civilian clothes that felt like a costume I was eager to shed. The note I left on the kitchen counter was brief and deliberately vague. "Gone to find my future. Don't worry about me. I'll call when I can. Love, Sophia. Basic training was everything I had hoped it would be, and nothing like I had expected. The physical challenges pushed my body beyond limits I didn't know I had, while the mental demands forced me to think faster, react quicker, and lead more effectively than any classroom or textbook ever could have taught me. I excelled in ways that surprised even my drill sergeants, earning recognition in marksmanship, tactical planning, and unit leadership. My family's reaction to my disappearance was predictably dramatic. The phone calls started after 3 days, progressing from confused to angry to worried to furious. My mother cried through most of our conversations, begging me to come home and pursue a normal life. My father's voice carried a mixture of disappointment and something that might have been pride, though he was careful never to let the pride show too clearly. Derek, when he finally called from Alaska, was typically dismissive. "This is just another one of Sophia's attention-seeking stunts," I heard him tell our parents during a 3-way call. "She'll wash out in a few weeks and come crawling home, and then we can all move on from this ridiculous phase." His words stung, but they also fueled something deeper, something fierce and unbreakable that I hadn't known existed inside me. Every morning at 4:30, when the drill sergeant's voice cut through the darkness of the barracks, I thought about Derek's prediction. Every time I collapsed into my bunk after 18 hours of training, muscles screaming and lungs burning, I remembered his casual dismissal of my capabilities. Every moment when I wanted to quit, when the physical and mental demands seemed impossible to meet, I drew strength from proving him wrong. I graduated from basic training ranked 3rd in my class. The ceremony was attended by families from across the country, parents and siblings and grandparents beaming with pride as their soldiers received their first official recognition. I scanned the crowd anyway, hoping against hope that maybe, just maybe, my family had decided to surprise me. The empty space where they should have been standing felt like a physical ache, but it also clarified something important. I was building a life that didn't depend on their approval or recognition. My first duty assignment was Fort Carson, in Colorado, where I was assigned to the 4th Infantry Division and began the real work of being a soldier. The mountains reminded me of family camping trips from my childhood, back when Derek and I still played together instead of competing for our parents' attention. But this landscape belonged to me now, earned through my own choices and sacrifices rather than inherited through family tradition. The work was challenging and rewarding in ways I had never anticipated.
Intelligence analysis required me to process vast amounts of information, identify patterns and threats, and present findings to commanding officers who relied on my assessments to make critical decisions. I discovered that my brain was wired for this kind of strategic thinking, that I could see connections and possibilities that others missed, that I had a natural talent for understanding complex situations and developing effective responses. My commanding officer, Major Patricia Williams, became the mentor I had never had at home. She was a career soldier with 15 years of service, a woman who had fought tooth and nail for every promotion and recognition in a system that still viewed female soldiers with skepticism. She saw potential in me that even I didn't fully understand, pushing me to pursue advanced training, recommending me for specialized assignments, and providing the guidance I had always craved from my father. "You have natural leadership abilities, Martinez," she told me during my 6-month review, using my last name in the formal military tradition. "But more importantly, you have the intellectual capacity to see beyond the immediate tactical situation to the broader strategic implications. That's not something that can be taught. It's either there or it isn't, and you have it in spades." The praise felt foreign and wonderful, like hearing a language I had always understood but never been allowed to speak. Major Williams recommended me for officer candidate school, a path that would transform me from an enlisted soldier into a commissioned officer, putting me on the same career track that Derek had inherited through his West Point education. The application process was rigorous, requiring letters of recommendation, academic transcripts, physical fitness evaluations, and psychological assessments. Every document I submitted felt like another step away from the family that had never believed in my potential, and toward a future I was creating through my own merit and determination. During this time, my contact with my family became increasingly sporadic. Derek was busy with his own military assignments, and his letters home focused entirely on his experiences, his challenges, and his growing reputation as a promising young officer. My parents forwarded these letters to me occasionally, long accounts of Derek's latest achievements that never included questions about my own service or acknowledgement of my growing success. The few times Derek and I spoke directly, usually during brief phone calls arranged by our mother, the conversations were stilted and competitive. He would describe his latest assignment or commendation, clearly expecting me to be impressed by his rapid advancement through the officer ranks. When I mentioned my own achievements, high scores in advanced training, recommendations from superior officers, my acceptance into specialized programs, he would deflect or change the subject, as if my success somehow diminished his own. "It's different for women," he said during one particularly frustrating conversation. "The standards are lower, the expectations are different. You're not really competing at the same level I am." His words echoed our father's dismissive attitude from years earlier, that casual assumption that my achievements were somehow less valid because of my gender. I stopped sharing details about my military career after that conversation. If my family wanted to believe that I was playing soldier while Derek was the real deal, I would let them maintain that illusion. Meanwhile, I focused on building the life and career they couldn't imagine I was capable of achieving. Officer candidate school was brutal and transformative. 12 weeks of intensive training designed to break down civilians and build up leaders. The physical demands were crushing, the academic requirements were overwhelming, and the psychological pressure was relentless. Candidates dropped out almost daily, unable to handle the stress and demands of military leadership training. I thrived. Every challenge was another opportunity to prove that I belonged in this world, that I could not only meet the standards expected of military officers, but exceed them. My instructors noted my tactical thinking, my ability to remain calm under pressure, and my natural command presence. I graduated second in my class, earning a commission as a second lieutenant and the right to wear the gold bars that marked me as an officer in the United States Army. The ceremony was smaller than my basic training graduation, more focused on the individual achievement of earning a commission rather than the mass celebration of completing initial training. Once again, I scanned the audience for familiar faces and found none. Once again, the absence of my family felt like both a wound and a liberation. My first assignment as an officer was to an intelligence unit preparing for deployment overseas. The work was classified, important, and exactly the kind of challenging assignment I had dreamed about during those long nights in my childhood bedroom. I was responsible for a team of analysts, for briefing senior commanders, for making decisions that would impact lives and missions in ways I was only beginning to understand. The months of preparation flew by in a blur of briefings, training exercises, and team building. I learned to balance the technical aspects of intelligence work with the human demands of leadership, to make hard decisions under pressure, and to earn the respect and trust of soldiers who looked to me for guidance and direction. My team was a mix of experienced non-commissioned officers and newer soldiers, men and women who brought different skills and perspectives to our collective mission. Leading them required me to draw on everything I had learned about communication, strategy, and human nature, skills I had developed through years of navigating family dynamics and military training. Sergeant First Class Reynolds, my senior non-commissioned officer, had initially been skeptical about taking orders from a young female lieutenant fresh out of officer training. But as we worked together, as he saw my analytical abilities and leadership style in action, his skepticism transformed into professional respect and eventually into genuine loyalty. "Ma'am," he said to me one evening as we finished reviewing intelligence reports, "I've worked with a lot of officers over the years, and most of them were more concerned with their own careers than with the mission or the people under their command. You're different. You actually give a damn about getting it right." His words meant more to me than any family praise I had never received. This was recognition based on performance, on results, on the kind of professional competence that had nothing to do with gender or family expectations. This was the validation I had been seeking my entire life, earned through my own efforts and sacrifices. Our deployment was to a forward operating base in Afghanistan, where my intelligence unit would support combat operations and provide critical analysis of enemy activities and intentions. The work was dangerous, demanding, and exactly what I had trained for during years of preparation. I was responsible for a team of analysts, for briefing senior commanders, for making decisions that would impact lives and missions in ways I was only beginning to understand. The months of preparation flew by in a blur of briefings, training exercises, and team building. I learned to balance the technical aspects of intelligence work with the human demands of leadership, to make hard decisions under pressure, and to earn the respect and trust of soldiers who looked to me for guidance and direction. My team was a mix of experienced non-commissioned officers and newer soldiers, men and women who brought different skills and perspectives to our collective mission. Leading them required me to draw on everything I had learned about communication, strategy, and human nature, skills I had developed through years of navigating family dynamics and military training. Sergeant First Class Reynolds, my senior non-commissioned officer, had initially been skeptical about taking orders from a young female lieutenant fresh out of officer training. But as we worked together, as he saw my analytical abilities and leadership style in action, his skepticism transformed into professional respect and eventually into genuine loyalty. "Ma'am," he said to me one evening as we finished reviewing intelligence reports, "I've worked with a lot of officers over the years, and most of them were more concerned with their own careers than with the mission or the people under their command. You're different. You actually give a damn about getting it right." His words meant more to me than any family praise I had never received. This was recognition based on performance, on results, on the kind of professional competence that had nothing to do with gender or family expectations. This was the validation I had been seeking my entire life, earned through my own efforts and sacrifices. Our deployment was to a forward operating base in Afghanistan, where my intelligence unit would support combat operations and provide critical analysis of enemy activities and intentions. The work was dangerous, demanding, and exactly what I had trained for during years of preparation.
For the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was meant to do. The deployment lasted 15 months, during which my team processed thousands of intelligence reports, briefed hundreds of mission commanders, and contributed to operations that saved lives and advanced strategic objectives. The work was often tedious, sometimes terrifying, and always critically important. Every analysis we provided, every threat we identified, every recommendation we made had real-world consequences for soldiers in the field and civilians caught in the crossfire. I learned to function on minimal sleep, to make life-or-death decisions with incomplete information, and to maintain team morale and effectiveness under conditions that pushed everyone to their physical and mental limits. I learned that leadership wasn't about giving orders or demanding respect, but about earning trust through competence, supporting your people through difficulties, and making the hard choices that others couldn't or wouldn't make. During our deployment, I received 2 commendations for exceptional service and was promoted ahead of schedule to first lieutenant. The recognition felt surreal, like something that was happening to someone else, someone who had always been destined for military success, rather than someone who had fought for every opportunity and achievement. My family's letters during this period were infrequent and focused primarily on Derek's parallel career progression. He had been promoted to first lieutenant around the same time, though through the normal timeline rather than early promotion, and had received his first choice of assignment to a prestigious unit in Germany. My parents' pride in his achievements continued to fill their correspondence, while my own service remained largely unacknowledged. The few times they mentioned my deployment, it was with worry rather than pride, expressing concern for my safety and suggesting that I had chosen a dangerous path unnecessarily. My mother's letters included newspaper clippings about female soldiers who had been injured or killed overseas, as if these stories would convince me to abandon my military career and return to the safe, conventional life they had envisioned for me. I stopped reading their letters closely, filing them away unread along with the growing collection of family correspondence that seemed to exist in a parallel universe where my achievements didn't matter and my choices were viewed as mistakes rather than successes. Instead, I focused on the immediate demands of my mission and the long-term goals I had set for my military career. The end of our deployment was bittersweet. I had formed bonds with my team members that felt deeper and more meaningful than most family relationships, professional connections based on shared sacrifice and mutual respect. We had accomplished important work under difficult conditions, and I was proud of what we had achieved together. But I also knew that returning to the United States would mean facing questions about my future, decisions about my next assignment, and the ongoing challenge of building a military career in a system that still questioned whether women belonged in combat-related roles. My homecoming was typically understated. No family gathered at the airport to welcome me back, no celebration to mark the completion of a successful deployment. Instead, I reported to my new duty station at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, where I had been assigned to the Command and General Staff College as both a student and an instructor.
The assignment was prestigious, the kind of position usually reserved for officers being groomed for senior leadership roles. It represented recognition of my analytical abilities and leadership potential, but it also meant years of academic work, advanced military education, and preparation for increasingly complex responsibilities. Fort Leavenworth felt like a different world after the intensity of overseas deployment. The work was intellectually demanding but physically comfortable, focused on strategic planning and advanced military theory rather than immediate tactical operations. I found myself studying alongside officers from all branches of the military, learning from their experiences while sharing my own insights from intelligence work and combat deployment. The academic environment suited me perfectly. I had always been a strong student, but military education combined theoretical knowledge with practical application in ways that made complex concepts feel relevant and important. I excelled in strategic planning courses, earned recognition for my research on intelligence operations, and developed a reputation as someone who could synthesize vast amounts of information into clear, actionable recommendations. My thesis project focused on the integration of human intelligence and technological surveillance in modern warfare, a topic that drew on my deployment experience while contributing new insights to military doctrine. The research required months of analysis, interviews with senior intelligence officers, and the development of new frameworks for understanding how information warfare would evolve in future conflicts. The work was challenging and rewarding, but it also highlighted how far I had come from the uncertain teenager who had once asked her father for permission to pursue military service. I was now an experienced officer with combat deployment experience, advanced education, and growing recognition for my analytical and leadership abilities. Yet my family continued to view my military career as a phase or experiment rather than a serious professional commitment. Derek, meanwhile, had been promoted to captain and was serving in increasingly important positions within his unit in Germany. His letters home, which my parents continued to forward to me, described his latest achievements and the recognition he was receiving from senior officers. The implied contrast was clear. He was the serious military professional, while I was still the little sister playing at being a soldier. The assumption might have been hurtful if I had still been seeking their approval or validation. Instead, it simply reinforced my decision to build a life and career independent of their expectations or recognition. I had found my place in the military, earned respect through my own efforts, and created a professional identity that had nothing to do with family legacy or inherited expectations. During my second year at Fort Leavenworth, I received an opportunity that would change the trajectory of my entire career. The Army was establishing a new intelligence fusion center designed to integrate information from multiple sources and provide strategic analysis for senior commanders. The position required someone with deployment experience, advanced education, and the analytical skills to process complex, multi-source intelligence. I was offered the position of operations officer for the new unit, a role that would put me at the center of some of the most important intelligence work being conducted by the military. The assignment came with promotion to captain and the opportunity to build a new organization from the ground up, selecting personnel, developing procedures, and establishing the protocols that would guide intelligence operations for years to come. The promotion ceremony was small and professional, attended by colleagues and superior officers who had worked with me over the previous years. Major Williams, who had since been promoted to lieutenant colonel, pinned my new rank insignia while speaking about my contributions to military intelligence and my potential for continued advancement. "Captain Martinez represents the best of what military intelligence can be," she said during the brief ceremony. "She combines analytical brilliance with practical experience, theoretical knowledge with hands-on leadership skills. The Army is lucky to have officers of her caliber, and I'm confident she'll continue to make significant contributions to our mission and our service." Her words felt like the family recognition I had never received, professional validation that was based on merit and achievement rather than expectations or favoritism. I thought briefly about my parents and Derek, wondering if they would be proud if they could see this moment, then dismissed the thought. Their opinion no longer mattered to my sense of accomplishment or professional identity. During my second year at Fort Leavenworth, I received an opportunity that would change the trajectory of my entire career. The Army was establishing a new intelligence fusion center designed to integrate information from multiple sources and provide strategic analysis for senior commanders. The position required someone with deployment experience, advanced education, and the analytical skills to process complex, multi-source intelligence. I was offered the position of operations officer for the new unit, a role that would put me at the center of some of the most important intelligence work being conducted by the military. The assignment came with promotion to captain and the opportunity to build a new organization from the ground up, selecting personnel, developing procedures, and establishing the protocols that would guide intelligence operations for years to come. The promotion ceremony was small and professional, attended by colleagues and superior officers who had worked with me over the previous years. Major Williams, who had since been promoted to lieutenant colonel, pinned my new rank insignia while speaking about my contributions to military intelligence and my potential for continued advancement. Captain Martinez represents the best of what military intelligence can be, she said during the brief ceremony. She combines analytical brilliance with practical experience, theoretical knowledge with hands-on leadership skills. The Army is lucky to have officers of her caliber, and I'm confident she'll continue to make significant contributions to our mission and our service. Her words felt like the family recognition I had never received, professional validation that was based on merit and achievement rather than expectations or favoritism. I thought briefly about my parents and Derek, wondering if they would be proud if they could see this moment, then dismissed the thought. Their opinion no longer mattered to my sense of accomplishment or professional identity. I had found my place in the military, earned respect through my own efforts, and created a professional identity that had nothing to do with family legacy or inherited expectations. During my second year at Fort Leavenworth, I received an opportunity that would change the trajectory of my entire career. The Army was establishing a new intelligence fusion center designed to integrate information from multiple sources and provide strategic analysis for senior commanders. The position required someone with deployment experience, advanced education, and the analytical skills to process complex, multi-source intelligence. I was offered the position of operations officer for the new unit, a role that would put me at the center of some of the most important intelligence work being conducted by the military. The assignment came with promotion to captain and the opportunity to build a new organization from the ground up, selecting personnel, developing procedures, and establishing the protocols that would guide intelligence operations for years to come. The promotion ceremony was small and professional, attended by colleagues and superior officers who had worked with me over the previous years. Major Williams, who had
The new assignment required me to relocate to Washington, D.C., where the Intelligence Fusion Center was being established within the Pentagon complex. The work was classified at the highest levels, involving coordination with multiple agencies and analysis of intelligence that would inform policy decisions and military operations around the world. For the first time in my military career, I was working directly with general officers and senior civilian officials, briefing Assistant Secretaries of Defense and providing analysis that would influence strategic decisions about troop deployments, resource allocation, and operational priorities. The responsibility was enormous, but I had been preparing for this kind of work throughout my entire military career. My team consisted of officers and analysts from all military services, plus civilian specialists from various intelligence agencies. Leading this diverse group required diplomatic skills I had never needed in previous assignments, the ability to coordinate competing priorities and perspectives while maintaining focus on our collective mission. The work was demanding and rewarding in ways I had never experienced. Every analysis we produced, every briefing we provided, every recommendation we made had the potential to impact national security and military operations around the world. The intellectual challenges were matched by the weight of responsibility, knowing that lives and strategic objectives depended on the accuracy and insights of our intelligence products. During this assignment, I was promoted to major ahead of the normal timeline, recognition of my performance and potential for continued advancement. The promotion came with new responsibilities and the expectation that I would eventually move into senior leadership positions within the intelligence community. My family's reaction to news of my promotion was typically muted. My mother expressed pride but also continued concern about my chosen career path, while my father acknowledged the achievement without really understanding its significance within military hierarchy. Derek, who had been promoted to major through the normal timeline, was characteristically dismissive. "Intelligence work is important," he said during one of our rare phone conversations, "but it's not the same as leading soldiers in combat operations. It's more like being a really well-informed analyst than being a real military commander." His words revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of modern military operations, where intelligence and analysis were integral to every aspect of combat effectiveness and strategic success. But I no longer felt compelled to educate him about the realities of contemporary warfare or defend the importance of my contributions to military effectiveness. Instead, I focused on the next phase of my career development. Senior officials within the intelligence community had identified me as someone with the potential for executive leadership, and I was selected for participation in a special program designed to prepare officers for positions at the highest levels of military and government service. The program required additional education at the National War College, where I would study alongside officers from all military services and civilian officials from across the government. The curriculum focused on strategic thinking, policy development, and the integration of military capabilities with diplomatic and economic instruments of national power. The academic work was intellectually stimulating, but the real value of the program was the opportunity to build relationships with future leaders from across the military and government. These were the people who would shape policy and strategy for decades to come, and being part of their professional network would be crucial for anyone aspiring to senior leadership positions. My thesis project at the National War College examined the evolution of intelligence requirements in an era of great power competition, analyzing how traditional approaches to information gathering and analysis needed to adapt to address emerging threats and technological capabilities. The research required extensive consultation with senior intelligence officials and policymakers, providing insights into strategic planning processes at the highest levels of government. The thesis was selected for publication in the National Defense University's Strategic Studies Journal, recognition that placed my research within the broader academic conversation about national security and military strategy. For someone who had once been dismissed as unsuitable for military service because of her gender, seeing my name on a publication that would be read by senior military and civilian officials felt like a profound validation of the path I had chosen. Upon graduation from the National War College, I was promoted to lieutenant colonel and assigned as the Deputy Director of Strategic Intelligence for U.S. Central Command, responsible for intelligence analysis covering one of the most strategically important regions in the world. The position required relocation to Tampa, Florida, where CENTCOM headquarters coordinated military operations across the Middle East and Central Asia. The work involved briefing four-star generals, coordinating intelligence support for ongoing operations, and providing strategic analysis that would influence major policy decisions about military engagement and resource allocation. Every day brought new challenges, from analyzing emerging threats to managing relationships with international intelligence partners to developing new approaches to complex strategic problems. My performance in this role earned recognition from the CENTCOM leadership and resulted in my selection for promotion to colonel, a rank achieved by fewer than 2% of military officers and representing recognition as someone with the potential for senior leadership at the highest levels of the military. The promotion ceremony was held at CENTCOM headquarters, with the commanding general himself presiding over the event. As he pinned the Silver Eagle insignia on my uniform, he spoke about my contributions to military intelligence and strategic analysis, noting that I represented the future of military leadership in an increasingly complex world. Colonel Martinez has demonstrated throughout her career that excellence in military service is not determined by background or expectations, but performance, dedication, and the ability to adapt and excel under the most challenging circumstances, he said during the ceremony. She is exactly the kind of leader our military needs as we face the strategic challenges of the 21st century. The general's words represented professional recognition at the highest levels, acknowledgement that my contributions to military effectiveness and national security were valued and respected by senior leadership. More importantly, they represented personal validation that my decision to pursue military service despite my family's skepticism had been vindicated through years of dedicated performance and continuous achievement. Standing in that ceremony, wearing the uniform I had earned through my own efforts and sacrifice, I thought about the young woman who had once asked her father for permission to serve her country. That person felt like someone from another lifetime, someone who had needed external validation to believe in her own potential and capabilities. The colonel who accepted promotion that day was someone who had learned to validate herself through performance and achievement, someone who had built a career and identity independent of family expectations or approval. The uniform was no longer a costume or disguise, but the authentic expression of who I had become through years of dedication, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment to service. But even as I celebrated this milestone, I knew that my family continued to view my military career through the lens of their own expectations and assumptions.
Derek had also been promoted to lieutenant colonel, though through the normal timeline, and was serving in increasingly important positions. My parents' communications continued to focus primarily on his achievements, treating my own success as secondary or less significant. The disconnect between my professional reality and my family's perception of that reality had become so complete that it felt like we were living in parallel universes. In their world, Derek was the serious military professional, while I was still the little sister who had chosen an unconventional path. In my world, I was a senior military officer with significant responsibilities and recognition, someone who had exceeded every expectation except those of the people who had never believed in my potential in the first place. This fundamental misunderstanding would continue for several more years, through additional promotions, prestigious assignments, and growing recognition within the military and intelligence community.
It would persist through my selection for increasingly important positions, through commendations and awards that marked me as one of the most successful officers of my generation, through achievements that should have been impossible to ignore or dismiss. The truth was that my family had never really seen me, had never understood who I was or what I was capable of achieving. They had created a narrative about my life and career that fit their expectations and assumptions, and they had maintained that narrative despite overwhelming evidence that it was fundamentally incorrect. This willful blindness would eventually lead to a confrontation that would force them to confront the reality of who I had become and what I had achieved. But that confrontation was still years away, waiting for the right moment when the disconnect between their assumptions and my reality would become impossible to maintain. For now, I focused on the immediate demands of my position and the long-term goals I had set for my military career. There would be time later to address family relationships and misconceptions. There would be opportunities to correct false narratives and demand recognition. There would come a moment when the uniform I wore would speak for itself, when the rank I had earned would command the respect I had always deserved. That moment was approaching, though I didn't know it yet. It would arrive during a family gathering that was supposed to be a celebration, in a setting where truth could not be avoided or dismissed. It would come when my brother's assumptions finally collided with reality in a way that would change our family dynamics forever. But first, there were more years of service ahead, more achievements to earn, more recognition to accumulate. The foundation was being built, stone by stone, promotion by promotion, for a confrontation that would finally force my family to see who I had become despite their expectations and because of their dismissal. Part 2. The Rising Storm. The years that followed my promotion to colonel were a whirlwind of increasingly complex assignments and growing recognition within the highest echelons of military leadership. My position at CENTCOM had opened doors I hadn't even known existed, connecting me with senior officials across the government and military who were shaping policy at the national level. The work was demanding, often requiring 18-hour days and frequent travel to brief congressional committees, cabinet officials, and international partners. My next assignment took me to the Pentagon, where I was selected to serve as the Director of Strategic Assessment for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The position was one of the most prestigious intelligence roles in the military, responsible for providing strategic analysis directly to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and through him to the Secretary of Defense and the President himself. The office occupied a corner of the Pentagon's executive corridor, with security clearances that granted access to the most sensitive intelligence in the government. Walking through those halls for the first time as the director rather than a briefer or analyst felt surreal. These were the corridors where the most important decisions about national security were made, where generals and admirals with decades of experience deliberated on matters that would affect millions of lives around the world. And I was now part of that process, my analysis and recommendations carrying weight in discussions that would shape American foreign policy and military strategy. The responsibility immense. Immense. Every morning began with classified briefings that covered threats and developments from every corner of the globe. My team of analysts, drawn from all military services and several civilian agencies, produced assessments that informed decisions about troop deployments, weapon systems, alliance relationships, and strategic doctrine. The margin for error was non-existent. A single miscalculation or overlooked threat could have catastrophic consequences. My work during this period involved some of the most significant strategic challenges facing the United States.
The rise of near-peer competitors required fundamental reassessment of military capabilities and strategic priorities. Emerging technologies were reshaping the nature of warfare in ways that traditional military doctrines struggled to address. International partnerships that had anchored American strategy for decades were under strain from changing geopolitical realities. Navigating these challenges required not just analytical skill, but diplomatic finesse and strategic thinking that went far beyond traditional military planning. I found myself briefing foreign ministers and defense officials from allied nations, participating in strategic dialogues that shaped international cooperation on security issues, and contributing to policy development that would guide American engagement around the world for years to come. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Patricia Coleman, became both a demanding supervisor and an invaluable mentor during this assignment. She was one of the most senior women in military history, someone who had broken barriers throughout her career while maintaining the respect and confidence of subordinates and superiors alike. Her expectations for my performance were extraordinarily high, but so was her support for my continued advancement. Strategic thinking at this level isn't just about analyzing current threats, she told me during one of our weekly review sessions. It's about anticipating how those threats will evolve, understanding how our responses will affect future challenges, and recognizing that every decision we make today creates the context for decisions we'll face tomorrow. That kind of thinking comes naturally to some people, and you're one of them. Her confidence in my abilities was both encouraging and humbling. I had worked with brilliant analysts and strategic thinkers throughout my career, but being recognized by someone at General Coleman's level as having exceptional capability felt like validation of everything I had worked to achieve since that first conversation with my father in his study all those years ago. The work also brought me into contact with civilian officials at the highest levels of government. I briefed cabinet secretaries on emerging threats, participated in National Security Council discussions about policy options, and provided analysis that informed presidential decisions about military engagement and strategic priorities. These interactions required a different set of skills than traditional military briefings, involving political sensitivities and policy implications that went far beyond pure military analysis. One particularly memorable briefing involved presenting an assessment of emerging cyber threats to a joint session of congressional intelligence committees. The analysis my team had developed challenged conventional assumptions about how cyber warfare would evolve and recommended significant changes to both defensive strategies and offensive capabilities. The presentation lasted 3 hours, with detailed questioning from senators and representatives who were grappling with threats they didn't fully understand but knew could reshape national security. The recommendations from that briefing eventually became part of major legislation, authorizing new cybersecurity initiatives and establishing new organizational structures within the military to address emerging digital threats. Seeing my analysis translated into policy and resource allocation felt like the ultimate expression of how intelligence work could directly contribute to national security and military effectiveness. During this assignment, I was selected for the most prestigious professional military education program available to senior officers, the Advanced Strategic Leadership Program at the National Defense University. The program brought together colonels and Navy captains from all military services for intensive study of strategic leadership, policy development, and the integration of military capabilities with other instruments of national power. The curriculum was intellectually demanding, requiring extensive reading in military history, strategic theory, organizational psychology, and policy analysis. But the real value of the program was the opportunity to engage with peers who represented the future senior leadership of the American military. These were officers who had been identified as having the potential to reach the highest levels of military command, and the relationships formed during the program would influence military leadership for decades to come. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Patricia Coleman, became both a demanding supervisor and an invaluable mentor during this assignment. She was one of the most senior women in military history, someone who had broken barriers throughout her career while maintaining the respect and confidence of subordinates and superiors alike. Her expectations for my performance were extraordinarily high, but so was her support for my continued advancement. Strategic thinking at this level isn't just about analyzing current threats, she told me during one of our weekly review sessions. It's about anticipating how those threats will evolve, understanding how our responses will affect future challenges, and recognizing that every decision we make today creates the context for decisions we'll face tomorrow. That kind of thinking comes naturally to some people, and you're one of them.
Her confidence in my abilities was both encouraging and humbling. I had worked with brilliant analysts and strategic thinkers throughout my career, but being recognized by someone at General Coleman's level as having exceptional capability felt like validation of everything I had worked to achieve since that first conversation with my father in his study all those years ago. The work also brought me into contact with civilian officials at the highest levels of government. I briefed cabinet secretaries on emerging threats, participated in National Security Council discussions about policy options, and provided analysis that informed presidential decisions about military engagement and strategic priorities. These interactions required a different set of skills than traditional military briefings, involving political sensitivities and policy implications that went far beyond pure military analysis. One particularly memorable briefing involved presenting an assessment of emerging cyber threats to a joint session of congressional intelligence committees. The analysis my team had developed challenged conventional assumptions about how cyber warfare would evolve and recommended significant changes to both defensive strategies and offensive capabilities. The presentation lasted 3 hours, with detailed questioning from senators and representatives who were grappling with threats they didn't fully understand but knew could reshape national security. The recommendations from that briefing eventually became part of major legislation, authorizing new cybersecurity initiatives and establishing new organizational structures within the military to address emerging digital threats. Seeing my analysis translated into policy and resource allocation felt like the ultimate expression of how intelligence work could directly contribute to national security and military effectiveness. During this assignment, I was selected for the most prestigious professional military education program available to senior officers, the Advanced Strategic Leadership Program at the National Defense University.
My research project during the program examined how intelligence organizations needed to adapt to address emerging threats while maintaining effectiveness against traditional challenges. The work required extensive consultation with current and former senior intelligence officials, providing insights into how strategic intelligence had evolved over previous decades and where it needed to develop in the future. The thesis was selected as the outstanding research project for my class, recognition that placed my work among the most significant contributions to strategic thinking produced by the program. More importantly, the research caught the attention of senior officials within the intelligence community who were grappling with exactly the challenges I had analyzed. Upon completion of the program, I was offered a position that represented the pinnacle of intelligence careers, Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. The DIA was responsible for providing military intelligence to commanders and policymakers across the government, with a budget and personnel strength that made it one of the largest intelligence organizations in the world. The director position required Senate confirmation and came with responsibilities that extended far beyond traditional military roles. The nomination process was intensive, involving extensive background investigations, congressional hearings, and public scrutiny of my qualifications and experience. The Senate Intelligence Committee hearing lasted 4 hours, with detailed questioning about my background, my strategic vision for the agency, and my approach to managing one of the most complex organizations in the government. Senator Rebecca Hayes, the committee chairwoman, opened the hearing with questions about my qualifications for such a senior position. Colonel Martinez, you would be one of the youngest officers ever nominated for this position, and you would be leading an organization with more than 20,000 employees and a budget measured in billions of dollars. What makes you believe you're prepared for this level of responsibility? The question was fair and expected, but it also provided an opportunity to articulate everything I had learned and achieved throughout my military career. I described my progression through increasingly complex intelligence assignments, my experience briefing senior officials and policymakers, my research contributions to strategic thinking, and my track record of managing large, diverse organizations under challenging circumstances. Senator, I believe that effective leadership in intelligence organizations requires a combination of analytical rigor, strategic thinking, and operational experience that I've developed over 20 years of military service, I replied. More importantly, I've had the opportunity to work with intelligence professionals at every level, from analysts conducting their first assignments to senior officials making decisions that affect national security. That perspective has taught me that leadership in this field isn't about having all the answers, but about creating organizations that can adapt and excel in the face of rapidly changing threats and challenges.
The hearing continued with detailed questions about specific intelligence challenges, my approach to managing relationships with congressional oversight committees, my vision for technological modernization within the agency, and my plans for addressing emerging threats that traditional intelligence methods struggle to assess. Each question required not just knowledge of technical intelligence issues, but understanding of how intelligence capabilities integrated with broader national security strategy. The committee's final vote was unanimous in favor of my nomination, with Senator Hayes noting that my combination of operational experience, strategic thinking, and analytical capability made me uniquely qualified for the position. The full Senate confirmed my nomination by a vote of 87-13, with opposition focused on policy disagreements rather than questions about my qualifications. The confirmation ceremony was held in the Pentagon, with the Secretary of Defense administering the oath of office while my senior staff and representatives from across the intelligence community looked on. As I raised my right hand and repeated the oath, I thought about the path that had brought me to this moment, from that uncertain teenager asking her father for permission to serve to the senior intelligence official being entrusted with one of the most important positions in national security. The promotion to general that accompanied the position was automatic but still meaningful, representing recognition not just of my individual achievements but of my potential to contribute to military leadership at the highest levels. The silver stars on my shoulders felt like the culmination of everything I had worked to achieve, but also like the beginning of even greater responsibilities and challenges. Taking over leadership of the DIA required immediate immersion in issues that would define American intelligence capabilities for years to come. The agency was in the midst of major technological modernization efforts, struggling to adapt Cold War-era systems and procedures to address 21st-century threats. Budget constraints were forcing difficult decisions about priorities and capabilities. Personnel challenges were affecting retention and morale across the organization. My first 100 days as director were spent conducting comprehensive assessments of the agency's capabilities, challenges, and strategic priorities. I met with intelligence professionals at every level, from entry-level analysts to senior executive service officials who had been with the agency for decades. I visited field offices and overseas stations, observing operations firsthand and understanding how policy decisions made in Washington affected intelligence collection and analysis around the world. The findings from these assessments were sobering. The agency had tremendous capabilities and dedicated personnel, but organizational structures and processes that had been developed for different threats and different technologies were struggling to address contemporary challenges. Technological systems that had been cutting edge a decade earlier were now barriers to effective intelligence sharing and analysis. Personnel policies designed for a different era were failing to attract and retain the talent needed for emerging mission requirements. Addressing these challenges required fundamental organizational change, the kind of transformation that traditionally took years to implement and often failed due to bureaucratic resistance and resource constraints. But the threats facing the United States were evolving rapidly, and the intelligence community couldn't afford to wait for gradual, incremental improvements. I developed a comprehensive modernization strategy that addressed technological capabilities, organizational structures, personnel policies, and operational procedures. The plan was ambitious, requiring significant resources and fundamental changes to how the agency conducted its mission. But it was also essential, representing the kind of bold thinking that would be necessary to maintain American intelligence advantages in an increasingly competitive world. Presenting the modernization plan to Congress required extensive preparation and coordination with other agencies, departments, and congressional staff. The briefings lasted weeks, with detailed explanations of current capabilities, emerging threats, resource requirements, and expected outcomes. The plan faced skeptical questioning from members of both parties, concerns about costs and implementation timelines, and demands for metrics that would demonstrate success. The congressional hearings were intense and sometimes adversarial, with members expressing frustration about previous modernization efforts that had failed to deliver promised capabilities while consuming enormous resources. Representative Michael Torres, the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, was particularly pointed in his criticism. General Martinez, we've heard promises about intelligence modernization before, and we've seen billions of dollars spent on systems that don't work and capabilities that tunelize, he said during one particularly tense exchange. What makes you think this plan will be different, and what assurances can you provide that we won't be back here in 5 years explaining another failed modernization effort?
The question went to the heart of congressional concerns about intelligence community management and accountability. I had anticipated this line of questioning and prepared responses that addressed both the technical aspects of the modernization plan and the management approach that would ensure successful implementation. Representative Torres, you're absolutely right to be skeptical based on previous experiences, I replied. That's why this plan includes several features that distinguish it from previous efforts. First, we're focusing on incremental improvements that can be tested and validated before full implementation, rather than attempting revolutionary changes that create unacceptable risks. Second, we're establishing clear metrics and regular review processes that will allow both the agency and Congress to assess progress and make adjustments as needed.
Third, we're building on proven technologies and established partnerships rather than betting everything on unproven capabilities. The exchange continued for another hour, with detailed questions about specific technologies, implementation timelines, cost estimates, and risk mitigation strategies. Other committee members raised concerns about personnel policies, operational security, and coordination with allied intelligence services. Each question required not just technical knowledge, but understanding of how intelligence capabilities integrated with broader national security objectives. The committee's final vote authorized the modernization program with several conditions and reporting requirements. The victory was significant, representing congressional confidence in both the plan and my leadership of the agency. But it also created enormous pressure to deliver on the promises and timelines I had outlined during the hearings. Implementation of the modernization program became my primary focus over the following months. The effort required coordination with dozens of contractors, integration with systems used by other intelligence agencies, and management of technological upgrades while maintaining operational effectiveness for ongoing mission requirements. Every aspect of the program was scrutinized by congressional staff, audited by government accountability offices, and monitored by other agencies with overlapping responsibilities. The work was demanding and stressful in ways that combat deployments had never been. Military operations had clear objectives, defined timelines, and measurable outcomes. Government modernization efforts involved complex bureaucratic processes, political considerations, and stakeholder interests that could shift without warning. Success required not just technical competence, but political skill and diplomatic finesse that went far beyond traditional military leadership. Despite these challenges, the modernization program began delivering results within the first year. New analytical tools improved the speed and accuracy of intelligence assessments. Enhanced communication systems enabled better coordination with military commanders and policymakers. Improved data sharing capabilities strengthened relationships with allied intelligence services and law enforcement agencies. More importantly, the organizational changes that accompanied technological modernization began improving morale and effectiveness across the agency. New personnel policies attracted talented recruits from universities and technology companies who had previously been reluctant to work for government organizations. Professional development programs helped existing employees adapt to new technologies and assume greater responsibilities within the modernized agency. Recognition of these achievements came from multiple sources. The president mentioned the DIA's improved capabilities during a speech about national security priorities. Congressional oversight committees noted significant improvements in intelligence reporting and analysis. Allied intelligence services credited enhanced American capabilities with strengthening international cooperation on shared security challenges. Professional recognition was gratifying, but personal satisfaction came from seeing the impact of these improvements on intelligence professionals throughout the organization. Analysts who had been frustrated by outdated systems were now able to focus on their core mission of providing timely, accurate assessments. Operations officers had access to better information and communication tools that enhanced their ability to collect intelligence safely and effectively. Support staff were working with modern systems that made their contributions to the mission more efficient and meaningful. During this period, my contact with my family remained sporadic and superficial. My parents were aging, and their communications focused increasingly on health concerns and family news that seemed to belong to a different world from my professional responsibilities.
Derek had been promoted to colonel and was serving in important positions, though his assignments were primarily administrative rather than operational. The few times we spoke, usually during brief phone calls around holidays or family birthdays, the conversations followed familiar patterns. Derek would describe his latest assignment and the recognition he was receiving from his superiors. My parents would express pride in his achievements while offering polite but distant acknowledgement of my own career progression. The disconnect had become so complete that I sometimes wondered if they truly understood what my positions and responsibilities entailed. References to my work as government service or intelligence analysis suggested that they viewed my career as some form of civilian employment rather than senior military leadership. The fact that I outranked Derek by 2 grades and held positions with significantly greater responsibility seemed to escape their attention entirely. This willful ignorance might have been painful if I hadn't long since stopped seeking their validation or approval. My professional identity and personal satisfaction derived from the work itself, from the recognition of colleagues and superiors who understood the significance of what I was achieving, and from the knowledge that my contributions were making meaningful differences to national security and military effectiveness. The disconnection became more apparent when Derek announced his engagement to Amanda Richardson, a lawyer he had met while serving in Germany. The wedding was planned for the following summer at my parents' home in Millbrook, with extended family gathering for what was clearly intended to be a major celebration of Derek's personal and professional success. The wedding invitation, addressed to Colonel Sophia Martinez, arrived with a brief note from my mother expressing hope that I would be able to attend despite my busy work schedule. The casual dismissal of my responsibilities as merely busy work schedule rather than senior executive leadership of a major government agency encapsulated everything about my family's inability to comprehend what my career had become. I accepted the invitation, though with some trepidation about spending time with family members who hadn't seen me in years and who would undoubtedly approach me with outdated assumptions about my life and career. The wedding would also be an opportunity to meet Derek's fiancée and observe how he had chosen to present his military service and family background to someone who was becoming part of our family. Preparation for the wedding leave required extensive coordination with my staff and detailed briefings for my deputy director, who would manage agency operations during my absence. Even a brief vacation required careful planning when responsibilities included oversight of intelligence operations that operated continuously around the world. My executive assistant, a retired military officer who had worked with senior officials throughout her career, expressed amazement at the complexity of arrangements required for what most people would consider a simple family obligation. "Ma'am, I've worked with cabinet secretaries and 4-star generals, and I've never seen anyone with a schedule as demanding as yours," she commented while reviewing the coordination required for my absence. Most senior officials can delegate operational responsibilities for short periods, but intelligence operations don't pause for personal commitments. Her observation highlighted something I had gradually come to understand about my career trajectory. Each promotion and new assignment had brought greater responsibilities, but also greater constraints on my personal time and freedom. The price of professional success at this level was constant availability and unrelenting focus on mission requirements that affected national security. The disconnection became more apparent when Derek announced his engagement to Amanda Richardson, a lawyer he had met while serving in Germany. The wedding was planned for the following summer at my parents' home in Millbrook, with extended family gathering for what was clearly intended to be a major celebration of Derek's personal and professional success. The wedding invitation, addressed to Colonel Sophia Martinez, arrived with a brief note from my mother expressing hope that I would be able to attend despite my busy work schedule. The casual dismissal of my responsibilities as merely busy work schedule rather than senior executive leadership of a major government agency encapsulated everything about my family's inability to comprehend what my career had become. I accepted the invitation, though with some trepidation about spending time with family members who hadn't seen me in years and who would undoubtedly approach me with outdated assumptions about my life and career. The wedding would also be an opportunity to meet Derek's fiancée and observe how he had chosen to present his military service and family background to someone who was becoming part of our family. Preparation for the wedding leave required extensive coordination with my staff and detailed briefings for my deputy director, who would manage agency operations during my absence. Even a brief vacation required careful planning when responsibilities included oversight of intelligence operations that operated continuously around the world. My executive assistant, a retired military officer who had worked with senior officials throughout her career, expressed amazement at the complexity of arrangements required for what most people would consider a simple family obligation. "Ma'am, I've worked with cabinet secretaries and four-star generals, and I've never seen anyone with a schedule as demanding as yours," she commented, while reviewing the coordination required for my absence. "Most senior officials can delegate operational responsibilities for short periods, but intelligence operations don't pause for personal commitments." Her observation highlighted something I had gradually come to understand about my career trajectory. Each promotion and new assignment had brought greater responsibilities, but also greater constraints on my personal time and freedom. The price of professional success at this level was constant availability and unrelenting focus on mission requirements that affect national security.
The flight to Millbrook felt like traveling backward through time. The small regional airport, the familiar landscape of rolling hills and military installations, the streets I had walked as a teenager dreaming of a different life, all seemed smaller and more provincial than I remembered. The contrast with Washington, where every conversation involved matters of national importance and every decision had strategic implications, was jarring. My parents met me at the airport, and their reaction to seeing me in uniform was telling. My father, who had spent his entire career as a military officer, seemed genuinely surprised by the insignia on my shoulders and the array of ribbons and decorations on my chest. His expression suggested recognition that something significant had changed since our last meeting, though he couldn't quite articulate what that meant. "Sophia, you look very official," my mother said, her tone suggesting that she wasn't entirely sure how to process what she was seeing. "I hope you don't mind if Derek's friends ask questions about your work. Some of them are very curious about what you do in Washington." Her comment revealed the fundamental misunderstanding that continued to characterize their perception of my career. They viewed my position as some form of government employment that might be interesting to civilians, rather than senior military leadership that commanded respect and recognition within defense and intelligence communities. The drive to their house provided an opportunity to observe how my hometown had changed during my years of frequent relocations and overseas assignments. New housing developments had expanded the boundaries of what had once been a small military community. The base had grown significantly, with new facilities and expanded mission requirements that reflected the military's evolving role in national security. My childhood home looked smaller than I remembered, though my parents had maintained it carefully and made improvements that reflected their transition from active military life to comfortable retirement. My father's study remained much as it had been during my teenage years, with military memorabilia and photographs from his service career creating a shrine to his own military experience. Walking through that house, seeing the photographs and awards that documented Derek's progression through military service, while my own achievements remained largely unacknowledged, I felt a familiar mixture of nostalgia and disconnection. This had been my home, but it had never really been a place where my aspirations and achievements were celebrated or even fully understood. Derek arrived the next morning with Amanda, and their interaction provided immediate insight into how he had chosen to present himself and his military career to his future wife. He was clearly the center of attention, describing his various assignments and responsibilities with confidence that suggested he viewed himself as having achieved significant success within the military hierarchy. Amanda was intelligent and accomplished in her own right, with a law degree from Georgetown and experience in international law that had brought her into contact with military and diplomatic personnel throughout her career. Her questions about my work were more sophisticated than those I typically encountered from civilians, reflecting genuine understanding of how government organizations functioned and how senior positions within those organizations required specific qualifications and experience. "Derek mentioned that you work in intelligence," she said during our first conversation. "That must be fascinating work, especially with everything happening in the world right now. Are you involved in policy development, or is your focus more on operational analysis?" Her question demonstrated immediate recognition that intelligence work encompassed multiple functions and levels of responsibility.
More importantly, it suggested that Derek had described my career in general terms without providing specific details about my positions or achievements. My role involves strategic assessment and organizational leadership, I replied, choosing to answer in broad terms rather than providing details that might be inappropriate to discuss with someone outside the intelligence community. I work with policymakers and military commanders to ensure they have the information they need to make informed decisions. Amanda nodded thoughtfully, and I could see her processing the implications of what I had said. Her legal background had taught her to recognize the difference between junior analysts and senior executives, and something in my response suggested that my responsibilities were more significant than Derek had indicated. The conversation was interrupted by Derek, who had been listening with an expression that suggested mild discomfort with the direction of our discussion. "Sophia's always been interested in that analytical stuff," he said, with a tone that managed to be both dismissive and patronizing. "It suits her personality. She likes details and paperwork." His characterization of strategic intelligence leadership as interest in details and paperwork revealed either fundamental ignorance about what senior intelligence positions entailed or deliberate minimization of my achievements. Either way, it demonstrated that his understanding of my career had not evolved beyond the assumptions he had made years earlier when I first entered military service. Amanda's reaction to Derek's comment was subtle but telling. Her expression suggested recognition that his description didn't align with what she had observed about my demeanor and presence. People who worked with details and paperwork didn't typically carry themselves with the confidence and authority that came from executive leadership experience. The remainder of the weekend proceeded with similar exchanges, each interaction revealing the gulf between my family's perception of my career and the reality of what I had achieved. Wedding preparations provided numerous awkward conversations with relatives who hadn't seen me in years and who approached me with assumptions based on outdated information or Derek's dismissive characterizations. Uncle Robert, my father's brother who had served as a master sergeant before retiring, was particularly difficult to navigate. He approached me with the patronizing attitude that some senior enlisted personnel adopt toward junior officers, clearly expecting to engage in conversation that would demonstrate his superior knowledge of military life. "So, Sophia, Derek tells me you're working in some kind of research position in Washington," he said, with the confident tone of someone who believed he understood military hierarchies better than the person he was addressing. "That's good work for someone with your background. Analysis and reporting are important support functions." His assumption that I was performing support functions rather than executive leadership was consistent with my family's general inability to recognize what my career had become. The conversation that followed was painful and awkward, as I attempted to correct his misunderstanding without being condescending or revealing information that might be inappropriate to discuss. Similar exchanges occurred throughout the weekend, each one reinforcing my growing awareness that my family had constructed a narrative about my life and career that bore little resemblance to reality. They had created a story in which Derek was the serious military professional, while I was the little sister who had found some form of government employment that kept me busy and provided adequate income.
The narrative was so entrenched that contrary evidence seemed to bounce off without making any impression. References to my positions and responsibilities were either ignored or reinterpreted in ways that fit their existing assumptions. The military insignia on my uniform were noted but not understood. The deference shown to me by other military personnel at the wedding was observed but not processed. Sunday evening, as I prepared to return to Washington and the demanding responsibilities of my position, I reflected on the weekend's interactions and their implications for my relationship with my family. The disconnection had become so complete that meaningful communication seemed impossible. They had created a version of my life that served their emotional and psychological needs, and they were determined to maintain that version regardless of evidence to the contrary. Flying back to Washington, returning to an environment where my achievements were recognized and my contributions were valued, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for the family relationships that might have been possible if they had been able to see and acknowledge who I had become. Relief to be returning to a world where my identity was based on performance and achievement rather than assumptions and expectations. The wedding had clarified something important about my relationship with my family and my own sense of identity and belonging. They would never see me as I actually was,
and I had finally accepted that their perception was irrelevant to my sense of accomplishment and professional satisfaction. I had built a life and career that existed independently of their approval or recognition, and that independence was both liberating and complete. But events were already in motion that would force a confrontation between their assumptions and my reality. Derek's marriage to Amanda would bring someone into the family who possessed the sophistication to recognize what my achievements actually represented. Changes in my own career were creating opportunities for public recognition that would be impossible to ignore or dismiss. The stage was being set for a collision between the narrative my family had constructed and the truth they had refused to acknowledge. That collision was approaching rapidly, though none of us knew it yet. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing intelligence assessments for the National Security Council meeting scheduled for that afternoon. My executive assistant knocked on my office door with an expression that suggested something significant had interrupted the normal flow of classified briefings and strategic consultations that defined my daily routine. "General, your mother is online too," she said quietly. "She says it's urgent and concerns your father." The gravity in her voice immediately shifted my attention from the complex geopolitical analysis spread across my desk to the family concerns I had largely compartmentalized during my years of increasing responsibility and professional achievement. My father had suffered a massive heart attack, my mother explained through tears and fragmented sentences that revealed her shock and fear. He was in intensive care at the regional medical center near Fort Braxton, stable but critical, with doctors uncertain about his prognosis or the extent of damage to his cardiovascular system. Derek was already flying in from his current assignment, and she hoped I could arrange to come home as soon as possible. The conversation lasted only minutes, but it triggered a series of logistical arrangements that demonstrated the complexity of my professional responsibilities and the challenges of balancing senior executive duties with personal emergencies. My deputy director would need detailed briefings on ongoing operations and pending decisions. The National Security Council meeting required rescheduling or delegation to ensure continuous intelligence support for policy discussions. Congressional testimony scheduled for later in the week needed postponement, with explanations to committee staff who managed calendars measured in months rather than days. My chief of staff, a retired Army colonel who had managed crisis communications for multiple senior officials, coordinated the arrangements with efficiency that reflected years of experience handling situations where personal emergencies intersected with national security responsibilities. Within 3 hours, I was aboard a military aircraft bound for North Carolina, carrying secure communication equipment that would allow continued oversight of critical operations while attending to family concerns. The flight provided time to reflect on my relationship with my father and the complex emotions surrounding his medical crisis. Our interactions over the years had been cordial but distant, characterized by polite interest in my career progress without genuine understanding of what my achievements represented within military and intelligence hierarchies. He had never quite reconciled his expectations for my life with the reality of what I had chosen to pursue and accomplish. Part of me wondered whether his medical emergency might create an opportunity for more meaningful communication between us, for conversations that moved beyond surface-level pleasantries to address the fundamental disconnection that had characterized our relationship since my decision to pursue military service against his advice. Another part of me recognized that patterns established over decades were unlikely to change dramatically, even in the face of serious illness and mortality concerns. The hospital waiting room was familiar in its sterile uniformity, the kind of environment where families gathered to process fear and uncertainty while medical professionals worked to address crises that arrived without warning or preparation. Derek was already there when I arrived, still wearing his travel uniform and displaying the nervous energy that characterized his response to situations beyond his control. His reaction to seeing me was immediate and telling. His eyes moved quickly from my face to the insignia on my shoulders, taking in the silver stars that marked my rank as a general officer. For the first time in our adult relationship, he seemed genuinely surprised by something related to my military career, as if the physical evidence of my advancement had finally penetrated assumptions he had maintained for years. "Sophia," he said, standing to embrace me with an awkwardness that suggested recognition that something fundamental had shifted in our relationship dynamic.
I didn't realize you had been promoted again. When did you make general? His question revealed the depth of his disconnection from my career progression and professional achievements. The promotion had occurred more than 2 years earlier, along with my appointment to direct one of the most important intelligence agencies in the government. The fact that he was unaware of these developments, despite regular family communications, demonstrated how completely he had dismissed my military service as irrelevant to his understanding of military hierarchy and professional success. 2 years ago, I replied simply, choosing not to elaborate on the circumstances or significance of the appointment that had accompanied the promotion. How is Dad doing? Have the doctors provided any updates since this morning? The conversation that followed focused on medical details and family logistics, but I could sense Derek processing implications he had never previously considered. The deference shown to me by hospital staff who recognized my rank, the secure communication devices that required my periodic attention, the obvious complexity of arrangements required for my presence, all suggested that my professional responsibilities were more significant than he had understood. My mother's reaction was similarly revealing.
She embraced me with gratitude and relief, clearly comforted by my presence during a frightening and uncertain time. But her eyes also registered surprise at my appearance, taking in the uniform and insignia with confusion that suggested she hadn't fully processed what my career advancement actually meant. "I'm so glad you could get away from work," she said, using the same phrase she had used to describe my professional responsibilities since I had entered military service. "I know your schedule is very demanding, and it means so much that you're here." Her comment reflected the same fundamental misunderstanding that had characterized her perception of my career for years. She viewed my position as some form of demanding employment rather than senior executive leadership that required careful coordination and delegation to manage even brief absences. The distinction might seem minor to civilians, but it reflected a complete failure to comprehend the nature and significance of what I had achieved professionally. The first day at the hospital proceeded with the familiar rhythms of medical crisis management: conversations with doctors, consultations with specialists, monitoring of vital signs, and treatment responses. My father remained sedated while medical teams worked to stabilize his condition and assess the extent of cardiovascular damage. The uncertainty was difficult for everyone, but it also provided time for family interactions that hadn't occurred in years. Amanda arrived that evening, having rearranged her own professional commitments to support Derek during the family emergency. Her presence added a new dynamic to our interactions, particularly because her legal background provided analytical skills that allowed her to process information and ask questions that my parents and Derek couldn't formulate effectively. More significantly, Amanda's observations about family dynamics were unfiltered by years of established assumptions and relationship patterns. She watched interactions between Derek and me with fresh eyes, noting contrasts and discrepancies that longtime family members had learned to ignore or rationalize. During dinner at a restaurant near the hospital, Amanda asked questions about my career that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of government organizations and military hierarchies. Her legal work had brought her into contact with senior officials from various agencies, providing context for evaluating the significance of different positions and appointments. "Derek mentioned that you work in intelligence," she said during a lull in conversation about medical updates and family logistics. "That's fascinating work. Are you involved in policy development, or do you focus more on operational oversight?" Her question was casual but precise, reflecting professional familiarity with how government organizations functioned at senior levels. Derek answered before I could respond, using the same dismissive tone that had characterized his descriptions of my career for years. "Sophia does analytical work for the government. She's always been good with details and research, so it's a good fit for her skills." Amanda's expression shifted subtly, and I could see her processing the disconnect between Derek's description and the evidence she had observed about my professional responsibilities. The secure communication requirements, the complexity of scheduling arrangements, the deference shown by military personnel at the hospital, all suggested responsibilities that went far beyond analytical work or research support. "What level of analytical work?" she asked, directing her question to me rather than accepting Derek's characterization. "Are you briefing senior officials, or are you more involved in data analysis and report preparation?"
Her follow-up question demonstrated recognition that Derek's description didn't align with observable evidence about my position and responsibilities. More importantly, it provided an opportunity to correct misunderstandings that had persisted for years without direct challenge. I direct strategic intelligence operations for national security policymakers, I replied, choosing my words carefully to provide accurate information without revealing details inappropriate for discussion outside secure environments. The work involves coordination with multiple agencies and regular interaction with senior officials across the government. Amanda nodded thoughtfully, and I could see her processing the implications of what I had said. Her legal experience had taught her to recognize the difference between junior analysts and senior executives, between support staff and policy-level officials. Something in my response clearly indicated that my responsibilities were more significant than Derek had suggested. Derek's reaction was immediate and defensive. "Well, intelligence work is important," he said quickly, "but it's different from commanding troops and managing operational responsibilities. It's more academic, more theoretical." His tone suggested discomfort with the direction of the conversation and determination to maintain hierarchical assumptions that placed his military experience above mine. Amanda's expression became more thoughtful, and I could sense her beginning to question other aspects of how Derek had presented family relationships and military careers. She was intelligent enough to recognize that his characterizations might not align with reality, sophisticated enough to understand that military hierarchies reflect achievement and responsibility rather than personal preference or family dynamics. The conversation was interrupted by a call from the hospital indicating that my father had awakened and was asking to see family members. The medical update provided relief and shifted our focus back to immediate concerns, but I could sense that Amanda's perception of family dynamics had begun to change in ways that would have significant implications for future interactions. My father looked fragile and older than I had ever seen him, connected to monitoring equipment that tracked every heartbeat and breath with electronic precision. But his eyes were alert and focused, and he seemed genuinely pleased to see Derek and me together at his bedside. "I'm glad you're both here," he said, in a voice that was weaker than normal but still recognizably his own. "This whole experience has made me think about family, about things I should have said years ago." His words carried weight that suggested serious reflection about relationships and priorities, the kind of reassessment that often accompanied medical emergencies and mortality concerns. The conversation that followed was more meaningful than most of our interactions over the previous decade. My father asked about my work with genuine interest rather than polite obligation, demonstrating awareness that my professional responsibilities were more complex and significant than he had previously understood. "Your mother mentioned that you hold an important position in Washington," he said, his tone suggesting recognition that he had been uninformed about aspects of my career that deserved acknowledgement and respect. "I'm sorry I haven't been more interested in what you've accomplished. I think I got stuck in old assumptions about military careers and women's roles." His apology was unexpected and meaningful, representing the first time he had directly acknowledged that his perceptions of my military service had been influenced by outdated attitudes rather than accurate assessment of my achievements and potential. The conversation that followed was more meaningful than most of our interactions over the previous decade. My father asked about my work with genuine interest rather than polite obligation, demonstrating awareness that my professional responsibilities were more complex and significant than he had previously understood. "Your mother mentioned that you hold an important position in Washington," he said, his tone suggesting recognition that he had been uninformed about aspects of my career that deserved acknowledgement and respect. "I'm sorry I haven't been more interested in what you've accomplished. I think I got stuck in old assumptions about military careers and women's roles." His apology was unexpected and meaningful, representing the first time he had directly acknowledged that his perceptions of my military service had been influenced by outdated attitudes rather than accurate assessment of my achievements and potential.
The admission created an opportunity for more honest communication about my career and our relationship. "I understand, Dad," I replied, choosing to focus on the future rather than revisiting years of dismissal and misunderstanding. "Military culture has changed significantly since your service, and intelligence work in particular has evolved in ways that weren't predictable when I first enlisted." Our conversation continued for another hour, covering topics we had never discussed openly: the challenges of building a military career as a woman, the complexity of senior leadership positions in government organizations, the satisfaction I derived from work that contributed to national security and military effectiveness. For the first time, my father seemed genuinely interested in understanding what my professional life actually involved, asking questions that reflected curiosity rather than skepticism. His medical crisis had apparently triggered reassessment of priorities and relationships, creating space for communication that had been impossible when he was focused on maintaining established assumptions and expectations. Derek listened to this conversation with increasing discomfort, clearly struggling to process information that challenged his understanding of my career and our respective positions within military hierarchies. The revelation that I held senior executive responsibilities, that my work involved policy-level decisions and strategic oversight, that my achievements had earned recognition from officials at the highest levels of government, all contradicted narratives he had maintained for years. Amanda observed these exchanges with analytical attention, clearly processing information that revealed significant discrepancies between Derek's characterizations and the reality of my professional achievements. Her legal training had taught her to recognize credibility and authority, and something in my interaction with my father suggested that my career had reached levels of responsibility and recognition that Derek either didn't understand or had chosen not to acknowledge. The following morning brought improved medical news and preparations for my father's transfer from intensive care to a regular hospital room. His condition had stabilized, and doctors were optimistic about his recovery prospects, though they emphasized the need for significant lifestyle changes and ongoing medical monitoring. As family members gathered to discuss care arrangements and recovery planning, Amanda asked direct questions about my availability and schedule that revealed her growing understanding that my professional commitments involved more than routine government employment. "Sophia, will you be able to stay for a few more days, or do you have meetings and obligations that require your immediate return to Washington?" she asked, her tone suggesting recognition that my schedule might involve responsibilities that couldn't be easily rescheduled or delegated. The question was reasonable and practical, but it also provided another opportunity to correct family misunderstandings about the nature and significance of my professional responsibilities. "I can stay through the weekend," I replied, "but I have congressional testimony scheduled for Tuesday that involves issues requiring my direct involvement. My staff can manage most operational decisions, but some responsibilities can't be delegated." Amanda nodded with understanding that reflected familiarity with senior executive schedules and congressional oversight requirements. Derek's expression, however, suggested confusion and perhaps skepticism about my characterization of my professional obligations. "Congressional testimony?" he asked, his tone implying surprise that my work would involve direct interaction with congressional committees. "What kind of testimony? Budget hearings or technical briefings about analytical methods?" His questions revealed assumptions that my congressional appearances would involve routine administrative matters rather than policy-level discussions about strategic issues and national security priorities. The disconnect between his understanding and the reality of my responsibilities had become so significant that he couldn't process information that contradicted his established beliefs. "Strategic intelligence assessments and policy recommendations," I replied, maintaining professional discretion while providing information that should have clarified the nature and significance of my role. "Congressional oversight committees rely on intelligence community leaders for information about emerging threats and capability requirements." Amanda's reaction was immediate and informed, reflecting professional understanding of how congressional oversight functioned and what types of officials were called to provide testimony on policy matters. "That's significant responsibility," she said, directing her comment to Derek as much as to me. "Policy-level testimony requires extensive preparation and represents considerable trust from congressional leadership." Derek's response revealed the depth of his commitment to maintaining assumptions that had become integral to his self-image and understanding of our family dynamics. "Well, intelligence briefings are important," he said dismissively, "but they're really just reporting on what other people have discovered. It's not the same as making operational decisions that affect troops in the field." His characterization of strategic intelligence leadership as mere reporting demonstrated either profound ignorance about how modern military operations functioned or deliberate minimization of achievements that threatened his sense of relative status and importance within our family.
Amanda's expression shifted again, and I could see her beginning to question other aspects of how Derek had presented military careers and family relationships. She was sophisticated enough to recognize that senior intelligence officials didn't simply report other people's discoveries, that congressional testimony about policy matters required expertise and authority that reflected significant professional achievement. The moment of reckoning arrived unexpectedly, triggered by a casual encounter that would expose the full extent of family misunderstandings and force confrontation that could no longer be avoided or rationalized. We were leaving the hospital cafeteria when a distinguished older man in uniform approached our group with obvious recognition and respect. Colonel James Morrison was someone I had worked with during my Pentagon assignment, a highly regarded officer who had since been promoted to brigadier general and was serving as deputy commander at Fort Braxton. "General Martinez," he said, extending his hand with the formal courtesy that characterized interactions between senior military officers. "It's good to see you, though I'm sorry about the circumstances. I heard about your father's hospitalization and wanted to express my best wishes for his recovery." His greeting was professional and appropriate, but it immediately created a situation that would force my family to confront information they had spent years avoiding or dismissing. The deference in his tone, his use of my rank and title, his obvious respect for my position and achievements all contradicted every assumption they had maintained about my military career. Derek's reaction was immediate and visible, his expression shifting from confusion to shock as he processed the implications of what he had heard. The title general was unmistakable, representing a level of military achievement that couldn't be minimized or dismissed as routine government employment. "Thank you for your concern, Jim," I replied, using the informal address appropriate between officers of similar rank and professional relationship. "I appreciate you taking the time to stop by. Dad is doing much better, and we're optimistic about his recovery." General Morrison continued with professional courtesy that further emphasized my status within military hierarchies. "Please let me know if there's anything our medical staff can do to assist with his care. We have excellent cardiac specialists available if you need additional consultations or second opinions." His offer reflected both personal concern and institutional respect for my position, the kind of consideration that senior military officials extended to colleagues and their families.
The conversation lasted only minutes, but it provided unmistakable evidence about my professional status and the recognition I had earned within military leadership circles. After General Morrison departed, the silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable. Derek stared at me with an expression that suggested his entire understanding of our family dynamics and respective achievements had been fundamentally challenged. My parents looked confused, clearly struggling to process information that contradicted years of assumptions about my career and accomplishments. Amanda was the first to speak, her tone reflecting both curiosity and growing understanding of discrepancies she had been observing. "Sophia, you're a general?" she asked directly, seeking clarification that would resolve contradictions between Derek's characterizations and the evidence she had witnessed. "Yes," I replied simply, seeing no reason to minimize or explain away achievements that had been earned through years of dedicated service and professional excellence. I was promoted 2 years ago when I was appointed to direct the Defense Intelligence Agency. The revelation created immediate recognition for Amanda, whose legal work had brought her into contact with senior government officials and provided understanding of what directing a major federal agency actually entailed. The Defense Intelligence Agency was not an obscure analytical unit, but one of the most important intelligence organizations in the government, with responsibilities that extended across military services and geographic commands. Derek's reaction was more complex, involving shock, confusion, and something that might have been anger at having been excluded from information that fundamentally altered his understanding of our relative professional achievements. "You're a general?" he repeated, his tone suggesting disbelief that such a development could have occurred without his knowledge or awareness. "I never hid my career progression," I said calmly, recognizing that this confrontation had been inevitable and that it provided an opportunity to address years of family misunderstanding and dismissal. "You and the family chose not to pay attention to what I was achieving professionally."
My parents looked stunned, clearly struggling to reconcile their assumptions about my career with information that suggested I had reached levels of responsibility and recognition that they had never imagined possible. My mother's expression reflected confusion and perhaps embarrassment about years of treating my military service as unimportant compared to Derek's achievements. Derek's response revealed the depth of his investment in family narratives that positioned him as the successful military professional, while I remained the little sister pursuing unconventional interests. "But you never said you were a general," he protested, as if my failure to explicitly correct his assumptions somehow justified years of dismissive treatment. "I tried to tell you about my promotions and assignments," I replied, maintaining professional composure while addressing misconceptions that had persisted despite multiple opportunities for correction. "You dismissed my achievements as analytical work or government employment. You never asked for details, and you never seemed interested in understanding what my positions actually involved." Amanda watched this exchange with fascination, clearly recognizing that she was witnessing the collapse of family myths that had shaped relationships for years. Her legal training had taught her to identify credibility and authority, and everything she had observed suggested that my achievements were not only significant but substantially exceeded Derek's professional accomplishments. "How senior is general rank?" she asked, directing her question to Derek, but seeking information that would help her understand the significance of what had been revealed. Derek's discomfort was obvious as he struggled to explain military hierarchies in ways that would minimize the significance of my achievements. "General is a senior rank," he admitted reluctantly, "but there are different levels, and intelligence positions are different from operational commands." His response was technically accurate, but missed the fundamental point about achievement and recognition within military institutions. Amanda was sophisticated enough to understand that general officers represented the senior leadership of the military, regardless of their specific responsibilities or assignments. "What level of general?" she pressed, seeking specific information that would clarify my position within military hierarchies. "Are we talking about 1 star, 2 stars? What exactly?" The question forced direct acknowledgement of information that Derek had spent years avoiding or dismissing. 2 stars, I replied, providing factual information without editorial comment about its significance or rarity. Amanda's reaction was immediate and informed, reflecting professional understanding of what achieving general officer rank actually represented within military institutions. 2-star general directing a major federal agency, she said, clearly processing the implications. That's extraordinary achievement. How many women have reached that level? Her question highlighted another aspect of my career that my family had never acknowledged or celebrated, the barrier-breaking nature of my achievements within institutions that had historically excluded women from senior leadership positions. The combination of rank and appointment represented not just personal success, but contribution to expanding opportunities for future generations of women in military service. Very few, I replied honestly, recognizing that false modesty would serve no purpose in this conversation. The military has made significant progress, but senior leadership positions remain predominantly male. Derek's expression revealed his struggle to process information that fundamentally challenged his understanding of our respective professional achievements and family dynamics. For years, he had been the celebrated military professional, while I remained the overlooked sister pursuing unconventional interests. The revelation that I had significantly exceeded his career progression while remaining largely unrecognized by our family was clearly difficult to accept. My parents remained silent, clearly overwhelmed by information that forced them to reassess years of assumptions and expectations. Their pride in Derek's military career had been partly on comparison with my supposedly lesser achievements. Learning that my career had actually surpassed his in ways they had never understood created cognitive dissonance that was difficult to resolve. Amanda continued to ask informed questions that revealed the full extent of family misunderstanding while demonstrating her growing comprehension of what my achievements actually represented. "So you outrank Derek significantly," she observed, seeking confirmation of hierarchical relationships that hadn't been previously acknowledged.
Yes, I replied simply, seeing no reason to minimize professional achievements that had been earned through merit and dedication. Colonel is several grades below general officer rank.
The conversation continued for another hour, covering topics that had been avoided or misunderstood for years. The significance of my congressional testimony, the complexity of directing a major intelligence agency, the recognition I had received from senior government officials, the barrier-breaking nature of my achievements as a woman in military leadership. With each revelation, Derek's discomfort became more apparent, and my parents' embarrassment about their years of dismissive treatment became more evident. Amanda absorbed every detail with professional interest, clearly recognizing that she had discovered major discrepancies between Derek's presentation of family relationships and the actual achievements and hierarchies involved. The confrontation concluded with acknowledgement that could no longer be avoided or rationalized. My family was forced to recognize that their assumptions about my career had been fundamentally incorrect, that their dismissive treatment had reflected ignorance rather than informed judgment, that their celebration of Derek's achievements had been based on incomplete understanding of our respective professional accomplishments. Standing in that hospital corridor, wearing the uniform I had earned through years of dedication and sacrifice, surrounded by family members who were finally seeing me as I actually was rather than as they had assumed me to be, I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. Vindication because truth had finally emerged despite years of willful ignorance. Sadness because recognition had come so late and required such dramatic circumstances to achieve. Derek extended his hand with formal stiffness that reflected his struggle to adjust to new understanding of our relationship dynamics. "Congratulations on your achievements, General," he said, using my rank for the first time in our adult relationship. "I owe you an apology for not recognizing what you had accomplished." His words were appropriate but carried undertones of resentment and confusion that suggested ongoing difficulty accepting how fundamentally wrong his assumptions had been. The apology was necessary but insufficient to address years of dismissive treatment and missed opportunities for family support and celebration. My parents expressed similar sentiments, though their words reflected embarrassment and regret about their failure to understand and acknowledge my professional achievements. Their pride in Derek's military career had been genuine, but based on incomplete information about our respective accomplishments and contributions to military service. Amanda's reaction was different, reflecting professional respect and personal admiration for achievements that she now understood had been extraordinary by any measure. "I'm honored to meet you, General," she said, with sincerity that suggested genuine appreciation for what I had accomplished, despite family misunderstanding and lack of support. Her words meant more than family apologies because they reflected informed judgment rather than obligatory recognition. She understood what my achievements represented within military institutions and government hierarchies, and her respect was based on accurate assessment rather than family obligation. The following days passed with continued medical improvement for my father and gradual adjustment to new family dynamics that reflected accurate understanding of my professional achievements and status. Conversations became more respectful and informed, though underlying tensions remained about years of misunderstanding and missed opportunities for appropriate recognition and support. Derek's relationship with Amanda was also affected by revelations about his presentation of family relationships and military hierarchies. She had discovered significant discrepancies between his characterizations and reality, raising questions about other aspects of how he understood and presented his own achievements and status. My father's recovery progressed steadily, and within a week he was discharged from the hospital with instructions for lifestyle modifications and ongoing medical monitoring. The family crisis that had brought us together was resolving positively, but it had also forced confrontations and revelations that would permanently alter our relationships and interactions. Returning to Washington and the demanding responsibilities of my position, I reflected on the weekend's events and their significance for my personal and professional life. The confrontation had been inevitable, though I hadn't anticipated the specific circumstances that would force family recognition of achievements they had spent years ignoring or dismissing. The vindication was satisfying but incomplete. Years of dismissive treatment and missed opportunities for family support could not be erased by delayed recognition, however sincere. The relationships had been fundamentally altered by truth, but the damage from years of willful ignorance could not be entirely repaired.
More importantly, the confrontation had reinforced my understanding that professional achievement and personal satisfaction derived from work itself rather than external recognition or family approval. I had built a career and identity that existed independently of their understanding or support, and that independence remained the foundation of my sense of accomplishment and purpose. The uniform I wore represented not just military rank and professional achievement, but personal transformation from the uncertain young woman who had once sought her father's permission to serve her country. That transformation had been accomplished through my own determination and sacrifice, validated by colleagues and superiors who understood the significance of what I had achieved. Standing in my Pentagon office, looking out at the Potomac River while reviewing intelligence assessments that would inform policy decisions affecting national security, I felt profound satisfaction with the life and career I had built through my own choices and efforts. The family recognition that had finally come was gratifying, but unnecessary for my sense of professional identity and personal accomplishment. The woman who had once been dismissed as unsuitable for military service because of her gender had become one of the most senior intelligence officials in the government, directing operations that contribute to national security and military effectiveness around the world. That achievement stood on its own merit, independent of family understanding or approval, representing the fulfillment of aspirations that had begun decades earlier in my father's study. The uniform that had once been dismissed as fake had become the authentic expression of who I was and what I had accomplished through years of dedicated service and unwavering commitment to excellence. The recognition that mattered most came not from family apologies, but from the trust placed in me by colleagues and superiors who understood the significance of my contributions to military service and national security. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.